Thank you so much for taking a few moments out of your day to tune into our two-part discussion about the future of law as it relates to this new world. In a few moments, you will be introduced to John Platts, a professional labor and employment consultant for over 25 years, who has dealt with hundreds of employer relations issues, collective bargaining negotiations, management development and training, and has been a guest speaker at a number of educational institutions to share his wisdom with the professionals of tomorrow. His counterpart, Jocelyn Faintak, has been a human resource professional for over 5 years as both an internal employee and an external HR consultant in a variety of industries. Combining both John's experience and Jocelyn's eagerness provides listeners with two different perspectives on a variety of global issues as they relate to human resource management.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Perspectives. To our followers, thank you so much for tuning in, and to our new listeners, welcome. On Perspectives, we discuss various human resources and industrial relations topics in the workplace from both a millennial and a boomer points of view. We discuss topics like human rights and employment, workers' compensation, employee relations, harassment in the workplace, terminations, risk management solutions, and so much more. So today we're going to dive into the home-based work model, home-based work, 3 words that just roll off your tongue nowadays, and notably how it relates to the industry of law. Legal practitioners are one of the oldest professions we have in today's modern world, and it's an interesting juxtaposition between the new world of a home-based workforce and the old world of traditional compensation structures, the duty of loyalty, traditional employee and employer relationships, and finally, powerful corporations potentially facing deconsolidation. As traditions change, the industry of law will be front and center of these changes. Let's not forget that lawyers and legal professionals are still, in fact, employees at the end of the day. So, how does their future look? John, to start us off, I want to dive into the home-based work model and what that truly means on a macro scale. Many large organizations, Shopify as an example, have put out statements stating that their current workforce and any future employees will continue to work from home permanently. So how will organizations exercise their duty of loyalty in this new fashion? How will organizations retain their employees to make sure they don't jump ship? Take it away.
Okay, let's get going.
All right.
So, I mean, the Shopify example is certainly a good one. It's certainly a leading corporation in Canada. I think it's probably the best capitalized company in Canada right now. But so many other organizations are basically going to be following the lead of Shopify as well, whether they're doing it because of them or otherwise. But the legal community as well is faced with the same reality. Why? Because they too were shut down during the pandemic from time to time. They did have to also operate with reduced footprints in their office. And they, in fact, were having, if you wish, a model that had people that were home-based as well as working in the office, and sometimes both. You know, I picked up a quote here from Siva Tumarkin, a lawyer, who wrote in July of 2020 in the Canadian Lawyer magazine, "The hybrid working model with reduced office footprint is the future for law firms." Very simple, very clear cut. And the real estate obviously costs a lot of money. So why not possibly invest in technology as an example, reduce your footprint. You know very well that you're going to have admin staff that are going to be inside of an office. You may obviously have to house your files there. You may have to have client meetings there. You may in fact have some of the more advanced technological solutions, you know, for any types of particular meetings that you might want to have, such as even adjudicative types of sessions that are now much more commonplace. So, you know, certainly it's going to be home-based and it's going to be office-related at some point in time. Having said all of that, probably the most significant thing that I think has happened to, frankly, the world, and it's somewhat cathartic. The fact of the matter is that we are all taking a very different perspective on life, and lawyers are no exception to that. So they are now, in fact, no differently than all of us, looking at their immediate family, spending time with their immediate family, much more probably than they ever have, talking with their neighbors, spending times in the neighborhood. And all of these are becoming foundations for an altered state of mind. essentially quality of life is really, really important. And this is really critical in the legal community where it's all predicated on billable time, fealty to the organization, to the firm itself, as you go forward in your career path, trying to ascend the ladder to partnership. This is all part and parcel of how it has been, but now I believe there is some rethinking underway. So what we're faced with is that we have a knowledge about the duty of loyalty. So we know that as an employee, you have a responsibility to the firm. That is essentially quite clear. It's a fiduciary obligation. What we don't talk about very often is the duty of good faith. And that duty of good faith also implies the responsibility the employer has to the employee. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that all lawyers are indeed employees of the firm as well, albeit they may be compensated differently, and we'll talk about that after, but they're all employees of the firm. So this duty of good faith is going to put a little bit more of a burden on the employer, the managing partners, the equity partners, to really take a look at how they're treating the people, what kind of expectations the employees have got, et cetera, as well. And the home-based environment is one that's going to be, at this time, I'm not sure if it's as seductive as it was at the beginning, as people are probably tiring of it to some extent, but nevertheless, it remains a reality that we're going to have to contend with.
Yeah, I mean, well said. You touched on a few points there, John, that I really want to dive into. The first one is about billable time and compensation structures. So with any changes to traditional job duties, inclusive of lawyers and legal staff at these law firms, the current compensation model associated with the job need, if it's going to be changed, needs to be evaluated. Now that has two layers. The first is any fundamental contractual change, like hours of work, like expectations, even location for that matter, leads to potential constructive dismissal discussions. The second layer that I'd like to touch on is employers in Ontario, Quebec, or are federally regulated, pay equity comes into play as well. So for those of you listening who aren't sure what pay equity means, pay equity requires an assessment of all jobs in an organization, including law firms, and an unbiased comparison of the work traditionally done by women to the work traditionally done by men. So pay equity is enforced in order to determine whether the women who work at that organization are being paid fairly. For example, a receptionist for a company may be as valuable as a warehouse shipper or receiver. The Pay Equity Act requires an employer to compensate the work done by the female job class, the receptionist, at least equally to the work done in the comparable male job class, the shipper and receiver. In a nutshell, it means equal pay for work of equal value. Now, when it comes to the industry of law, this again is no exception. So, John, what does all of that have to do with our new normal in the home-based work?
Okay, thanks, Joss. I'm going to get to pay equity in a quick moment, but I think it's important that we remind ourselves of a couple of things. First of all, the route to equity partnership, which has always been the gold standard that every lawyer has aspired to, namely a share of the profits, has been sharply reduced over the years. You know, whether in fact it continues in that fashion, I guess remains to be seen. But those opportunities for equity positions are in fact diminished quite dramatically. So what it is now is a matter of you've got partners who, in name, if you wish, are in the marketplace. It looks good. It might satisfy an ego, but they are still only employees. They are receiving compensation no differently than anybody else. The quantum might be different. They're getting salary, they're getting bonus, but they're certainly getting a share of the profits similar to what the equity partners would be getting. So we already have that as a pressure point. And again, I'm going to be pulling that together when we talk about, you know, what does this all mean later on. But in the meantime, we also have this thing called pay equity. And you know very well that the Globe and Mail's been running a number of articles in the recent past on this whole issue around the fact that we have gender bias in the compensation structures, and including in the legal community itself. So the pay equity provisions itself are something that is crucial to be considering. I think it's going to be exacerbated because of it being home-based. we're going to have to be looking at it quite differently, because the whole issue around skill is probably going to be similar to what it always has been, but the responsibility might in fact be different. Managing a remote workforce, as an example, is a whole lot different than in fact having to manage folks who are in the office. So I think that the pay equity component is going to be probably important as it relates to this home-based work. We also have to take into consideration that when we talk pay equity, we're talking about the entire organization. So we're actually talking from top to bottom here. We're talking about the managing partner. We're talking about the equity partners who are on salary. We're talking about the associates. We're talking about a number of different folks to ensure that we, in fact, are compliant with pay equity. So it's a little bit more complex, and I would probably venture to guess that most law firms, certainly mid-sized law firms, do not, in fact, have a pay equity plan. You should be aware that if you have 10 or more employees, you should have been compliant since 1994, just as an example. So it's really important that we pay attention to all of this. And one of the things that I'm going to be recommending as a general rule is you're going to have to test the thoughts, the feelings of your people. You know, you're going to have to check the pulse. You're going to have a formal methodology to check the pulse on some of these things to make sure that you're going to be doing the right things. Cast aside even the compliance issue.
Yeah, you touched on something that I want to bring up. I'm going a little off script here, but with the pay equity, those 4 characteristics that need to be taken into consideration that John had mentioned. There's skill, responsibility, effort, and there's a 4th one.
Working conditions.
And working conditions. So in the home-based work model, I mean, there are female and male roles within the home as well. Do you think any of that would be taken into consideration for a job when it comes to family care, when it comes to home response? I'm not sure. I guess I'm just trying to allude to that the traditional gender roles of work and home are merged in the home-based model, and I'm wondering if pay equity has any place in that.
I don't think so. Not unless all of a sudden being a mother, a wife, is somehow going to find its way in evaluating a job. So fortunately, we have managed to separate the company from our home life as a general rule. So no, I don't think so. I think that there's going to be challenges because unfortunately, again, it would appear that females are cast into the responsibility of having to look after the family and having to essentially deal with children in the next room while they're trying to deal with a client matter. I'm sure is a whole lot more difficult for a female than it would be for a male. And now I'm probably becoming stereotypical.
Well, a male could too. You know, at the end of the day, there could be a stay-at-home dad. Like, I'm just wondering if that aspect of family life would be evaluated in the assessment of the job. No. Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So well, back to our pay equity for a moment. I can't underscore enough this matter of females and how they're compensated. I can recall that in 1988 is when we had the Pay Equity Act here in Ontario created. 1994 was followed by Quebec and now federally as well. Some of the other provinces got pay equity, but it's only for the public sector. So we're the only 3 jurisdictions that have it for the private sector, for law firms. So that in itself is already going to be a challenge as you try to take a look at how you actually pay people. You're going to have your grid that you use as an example based upon your years of practice. That's going to be put to the test to make sure that it's gender neutral. But then we also have the Pay Transparency Act that has come into fashion, not into fashion, it's into law as of 2018, and it's essentially been not put into practice. It was repealed by the Doug Ford government, so that it's not in effect at this moment in time. But the Pay Transparency Act is going to be another one of those featured pieces of legislation that when it is put into effect, it will mean that you cannot ask somebody what they were earning before. And females have traditionally not been as, I guess, as tough in their negotiations for getting the best price for their labor as perhaps men have been. So you're not going to be able to ask that, so you can take advantage, if you wish, of somebody who is not a good negotiator. And you're going to have to also be identifying salary ranges for your jobs. So all of these things, as you create transparency in how you compensate people, are going to become even that much more daunting for those firms who have been secretive about their rates of pay, and particularly where males have clearly outperformed females in terms of money that they have earned.
Yeah, I think too that touches on my next question. Actually, is about about the not the pricing that lawyers charge their clients, but more so of the compensation structure. I mean, the revenue streams that lawyers bring in. So you mentioned billable time, right? So that's a revenue stream, obviously, for that firm. And I'm not saying that billable time and all this stuff is going to completely change, but what I am saying is traditionally, you know, law firms have this big, beautiful office, and the physical work environment is very sought after. This presence of knowledge and wealth and ambiance and all kinds of aesthetics of, you know, just reeking wealth and reeking intellect. But now these offices are empty, and the physical environment remains completely untouched. So I'd like to take a step back and have a little bit of the mentality of people now that you talked about at the beginning. So this casual professional aesthetic that people now embody, you know, some more autonomy and freedom in the decision making that you have while working from home, has affected the business world as a whole, including law firms, I believe. And I guess what I'm getting at is these large law firms could be potentially facing like a deconstruction, and smaller, more boutique firms and young lawyers coming out of law school could potentially be migrated more towards that, like we've seen in other facets of business. You know, the startup world has exploded. Entrepreneurs has become have a degree in university entrepreneurship. And I'm wondering if do you think that's going to apply to the law community as well?
Well, you're pulling a bunch of things together there, Joss. You're not only talking about how we compensate lawyers, now we're talking really about the business of law. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what does it mean to actually have a firm? So let me just take a look at what it is that we do know at this moment in time. So taking what we've already talked about. So number one, home-based work is here to stay, in part or in whole, in the legal community. Number two, employees are reassessing their quality of life. They're really taking a good, careful look at what's important in life. Am I really going to be captive to those billable hours that I've been accustomed to and demanded of me in terms of my fealty to the organization, to the firm, as well as my opportunity to earn big bucks? Is that as important as quality of life that I've started to actually appreciate in the last year? Number three, that the young lawyers, especially female lawyers, are encountering both compensation challenges, but also a path to equity. And what I talked about earlier, there's a serious reduction in the number of opportunities for equity partnership today versus several years ago. Now, there's an important part here that I also want to underscore for the lawyers, and that is that the client file does not belong to the firm. It does not belong to the lawyer. It belongs to the client. So a departing lawyer, in fact, has a duty to confirm to the client that they are leaving, and it has to be done, obviously, in a very neutral fashion, in the same way that the firm is going to talk with that client and say, hey, Judy's leaving the firm. It's going to be up to the client then to make a determination whether they want their file to carry on with the lawyer that they've been dealing with, or that their loyalty is to the firm itself from whence that employee came from. So the point of the matter is the opportunity is there for lawyers to migrate away.